The stars had always been silent until the day they finally spoke back. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Earth Defense Station, watching the alien ship approach. It was nothing like the movies had predicted. The vessel was smooth and curved, glowing with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. After 30 years of watching from the shadows, the aliens had finally decided to say hello. Jake adjusted his uniform and tried to calm his racing heart. He had trained for this moment his entire career, but now that it was happening, everything felt unreal. Behind him, Lieutenant Kate Phillips checked her tablet for the 100th time, reviewing the first contact protocols that suddenly seemed inadequate. The alien ship docked with a gentle hiss. The airlock opened and Ambassador Zekthar stepped through. The Vryn was tall, nearly 7 feet, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. 4 eyes blinked independently as the translator device around its neck hummed to life. "Greetings from the Galactic Council," the device said in perfect English. "We welcome humanity to the community of civilized species." Jake extended his hand, remembered that might not be appropriate, and instead bowed slightly. "We are honored by your presence, Ambassador. Earth has waited a long time for this day." The ambassador's eyes seemed to smile, though its mouth didn't move. "We have watched your development with great interest. You have achieved spaceflight, established orbital stations, and maintained relative peace. These are the markers of a species ready to join the greater galaxy." Over the next few hours, Jake and his team listened as Zekthar explained how the galaxy worked. There were hundreds of intelligent species, dozens of major civilizations, and thousands of worlds. They were governed by treaties and councils, by laws that had been refined over thousands of years. It was organized, peaceful, and structured in ways that humanity had only dreamed about. But there were also rules about warfare. Zekthar explained this carefully, as if worried about frightening the humans. Conflicts still happened between species, the ambassador admitted. Resources were limited, territory was disputed, and sometimes diplomacy failed. But wars were fought according to the Covenant of Civilized Warfare, an ancient agreement that every species honored. Kate spoke up, her curiosity overcoming her nervousness. "What kind of weapons do you use?" Zekthar gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the air. Ships fired beams of brilliant light at each other, plasma bolts that splashed against shimmering shields. It looked impressive and strangely beautiful, like a deadly light show in space. "Energy weapons are the standard," the ambassador explained. "Plasma cannons, particle beams, directed radiation, each regulated by the Covenant to prevent excessive destruction. Shields have been perfected over millennia to defend against such weapons. Battles are decided by skill, strategy, and resource management, not by brutal force." Jake frowned slightly. "What about kinetic weapons? Missiles, railguns, things that just hit hard and fast?" The ambassador's eyes all focused on Jake at once, and for a moment the translator was silent. Then Zekthar made a sound that the device interpreted as laughter. "Such primitive technology? Commander, every civilized species abandoned kinetic weapons thousands of years ago. Once energy shielding was developed, solid projectiles became obsolete. They are relics, museum pieces from less enlightened times." Kate glanced at Jake, and he caught the look. There was something in her eyes, a thought she wasn't voicing yet. He filed it away for later. The rest of the meeting covered trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and an invitation for Earth to send representatives to the next Galactic Council session. Zekthar provided data packages containing star charts, technical specifications for standard communication systems, and historical records dating back thousands of years. It was overwhelming. The kind of information humanity had been searching for since the first radio telescope pointed at the stars. As the Vryn delegation prepared to depart, Zekthar paused at the airlock. "A word of advice, Commander Morrison. The galaxy is vast and old. We have learned many hard lessons over the millennia. The Covenant exists because unchecked warfare nearly destroyed us all. Honor the old ways and humanity will thrive among the stars." Jake nodded respectfully. "We'll do our best to learn from your wisdom, Ambassador." The alien ship undocked and glided away, its blue glow fading into the black. Jake stood at the observation window long after it disappeared, his mind racing with everything he had learned. Kate joined him, her tablet clutched to her chest. "Sir, did you notice something odd about their weapons technology?" "You mean how they think kinetic weapons are useless?" "Exactly." Kate pulled up the technical data on shields that Zekthar had provided. I've been reading through this. Their shields are incredibly advanced, designed to dissipate energy, redirect heat, and absorb electromagnetic radiation. But look at this. She highlighted a section of the specifications. There's almost no mention of defense against solid matter. It's like they never even considered it a threat. Jake studied the data, his frown deepening. Because no one uses kinetic weapons anymore. Why defend against something that doesn't exist? But we use them, Kate said quietly. Or we could. We've been developing railgun technology for the last decade. We just never put them on ships because we thought space combat would be all lasers and plasma, like in the science fiction stories. Jake turned to face her fully. You're thinking what I'm thinking, Kate nodded slowly. If their shields can't stop solid objects, and if we can accelerate a projectile fast enough, then their entire defensive doctrine has a blind spot big enough to fly a battleship through. That's a dangerous thought, Lieutenant. Yes, sir, but it's also a true one. Jake looked back out at the stars, at the vast galaxy that humanity was about to join. They were being invited into an ancient civilization with rules and protocols refined over thousands of years. It was an honor and an opportunity. But humanity had always been uncomfortable with other people's rules, especially rules that seemed designed to keep everything predictable and safe. Write up a report, Jake said finally. Everything you just told me with full technical analysis. Send it directly to Earth Defense Command, eyes only. Are you sure, sir? The ambassador made it pretty clear that we should follow their lead. Jake smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Kate, in the entire history of humanity, how many times have we been handed a rulebook and followed it exactly as written? Kate thought about it for a moment, then smiled back. Not once, sir, exactly. Get me that report by tomorrow. Something tells me we're going to need every advantage we can get in this bright new galaxy of theirs. As Kate hurried off to begin her analysis, Jake remained at the window. The stars looked different now, not empty and waiting, but full and watching. Humanity was about to take its place among civilizations that had forgotten more than Earth had ever learned. But maybe, just maybe, being new meant seeing solutions that the old and wise had overlooked. The galaxy thought kinetic weapons were primitive and useless. Jake had a feeling they were about to learn otherwise. 6 months had passed since the Vryn made first contact, and humanity was learning that the galaxy was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Representative Danny Carter sat in the enormous council chamber, trying not to look overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. The room was built for beings of all sizes and shapes, with platforms that floated at different heights and atmospheres that shifted from section to section. Hundreds of species gathered here to debate, argue, and occasionally agree on matters that affected billions of lives. Danny was here to observe, to learn how galactic politics worked before Earth tried to participate. But today's session was impossible to ignore. The Kolthari Empire and the Sidrani Federation were on the verge of war, and the entire council knew it. The Kolthari representative, a massive creature covered in bronze scales, was making his case. His species claimed an entire star cluster based on ancient territorial maps that predated most current civilizations. The Sidrani, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells, argued that those maps were invalid, and that their people had settled the cluster first. Danny listened with growing confusion. Both sides presented evidence, historical documents, and legal arguments. They debated the fine points of treaties signed thousands of years ago. They discussed which neutral observers would monitor the conflict and ensure compliance with the covenant of civilized warfare. It was all very formal, very organized, and completely insane. They were arguing about the proper way to go to war. When the session ended, Danny returned to his quarters and immediately opened a secure channel to Earth. Admiral Lisa Hayes appeared on the screen, her expression tired but focused. "How bad is it?" she asked. "They're actually going to fight," Danny said. The Kolthari and Sidrani both filed formal declarations of hostility. They've agreed on engagement zones, weapon restrictions, and scheduled their first battle for next week. "Lisa, they scheduled a battle like it's a business meeting." Lisa rubbed her temples. "Send me everything. We need to understand how this works if we're going to survive out here." Over the next few weeks, Danny sent detailed reports about the war. It wasn't like any human conflict in history. The Kolthari and Sidrani fleets met in designated neutral zones and fought according to strict rules. Energy weapons were limited to specific power outputs. Shields had to meet certain standards. When a ship's shields failed, it was allowed to retreat. Planets could be blockaded but not bombarded. Civilian ships were completely off limits. On Earth, the military commanders studied these reports with increasing frustration. Commander Ben Rodriguez led a team of strategists who had been analyzing galactic warfare for months, and their conclusions were unanimous. "It's designed to be a stalemate," Ben explained to the assembled officers. "Look at the numbers. Energy weapons at the regulated power levels take hours to wear down standard shields. Battles last for days, sometimes weeks. Both sides lose ships slowly, and eventually whoever runs out of resources first surrenders. But nobody actually wins." Admiral Lisa Hayes leaned forward. "Why would they design warfare this way?" "Because it's predictable," Ben said. "No surprises, no devastating new weapons, no risks of total annihilation. Wars are expensive enough that nobody starts them lightly, but controlled enough that losing one won't destroy your civilization. It's war as a political tool, not war as survival." Lisa considered this. "And our weapons?" Ben smiled grimly. "Our weapons don't fit their model at all." He pulled up a presentation that Kate Phillips had prepared. Lieutenant Phillips reviewed all the technical data the Vrin provided. Galactic shields work by dispersing energy, redirecting particle streams, and absorbing radiation. "They're incredibly sophisticated, but," Lisa prompted, "but they're nearly transparent to solid matter at sublight speeds. There's minimal kinetic impact resistance because no one has used kinetic weapons in 10,000 years. It's not even a weakness they know they have." Engineer Amy Chen joined the meeting remotely from the weapons development facility. Her face filled another screen, and she looked excited in a way that made Lisa nervous. "Admiral, we've been running simulations," Amy said. "If we take our existing railgun technology and scale it up for ship mounting, the results are remarkable. A dense tungsten projectile accelerated to 10% of light speed would pass through their shields like they're not even there." "What kind of damage are we talking about?" Lisa asked. Amy pulled up a simulation. A small projectile streaked toward a representation of a Kolthari warship. When it hit, the ship didn't explode dramatically. It simply ceased to exist, torn apart by the kinetic energy release. "The impact energy would be equivalent to a small nuclear weapon," Amy explained. "But without the radiation, electromagnetic pulse, or other effects that their shields are designed to counter. Just pure kinetic force. The ship's structure wouldn't be able to handle it." The room fell silent. What Amy was describing was a weapon that could end battles in seconds, not hours. A weapon that violated every principle of the covenant of civilized warfare, not because it was banned, but because everyone had forgotten such things could be effective. Lisa stood and walked to the window, looking out at Earth below. "If we build this weapon, we can't take it back. The galaxy has spent thousands of years developing their way of warfare. We'd be throwing all of that into chaos." "With respect, Admiral," Ben said carefully, "the galaxy developed their way of warfare for their benefit. They're old established powers who can afford long wars of attrition. We're new, small, and vulnerable. If someone like the Kolthari decides to push us around, we can't match them ship for ship. We need an equalizer, and if we use it?" Lisa asked. "What happens when we break their sacred covenant?" "We'll find out," Ben admitted. "But the alternative is being at the mercy of species who've had thousands of years to perfect the art of controlled warfare. We'd be playing a game where they make all the rules and we start at a permanent disadvantage." Lisa returned to her seat and looked at each face on the screens. These were good people, smart people, people who understood the weight of what they were proposing, but they were also right. Humanity had always survived by adaptation, by finding new solutions to old problems. Maybe that's what they needed to do now. "Amy, how long would it take to build a working prototype?" Amy's eyes lit up. "If we have full authorization and resources, I can have a ship-mounted railgun ready for testing in 3 months. Installation on an existing vessel would take another month." "Do it," Lisa said. "This is Project Thunderbolt, classification level Black. Only people in this room and essential personnel know about it. Danny, you don't mention this to anyone at the council. If they ask about our weapons development, you tell them we're working on improving our energy weapons to meet galactic standards." Danny nodded from his screen. "Understood. But Admiral, if we actually use this thing, the secret won't last long." "I know," Lisa said quietly, "but maybe we won't have to use it. Maybe just having it will be enough." She didn't sound convinced, and neither was anyone else in the room. Over the next 3 months, Amy and her team worked around the clock. The railgun took shape in a secure facility on the far side of the moon, where prying eyes couldn't see what humanity was building. It was elegant in its simplicity. Just magnetic coils and power systems, accelerating metal to speeds that would make it one of the most destructive weapons ever created. The test firing was successful. The projectile hit a decommissioned satellite with perfect accuracy, turning it into a cloud of expanding debris. The power consumption was high but manageable. The targeting systems worked flawlessly. Amy sent her report to Lisa with a simple message attached. "It works. God help us all, it works." Lisa read the report 3 times before making her decision. The Kolthari-Sidrani war was still grinding on, neither side gaining advantage. Danny sent regular updates about growing tensions between Earth and some of the more aggressive species. The galaxy was watching humanity, waiting to see what the newcomers would do. Lisa called Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to admiral and given command of Earth's orbital defenses. "Jake, we're installing Thunderbolt on the Valiant. Kate Phillips will oversee the integration. The weapon is to be kept secret and only used if there's no other choice." "Understood, Admiral," Jake replied. "Let's hope we never need it." But deep down, they both knew better. Humanity had built a weapon that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Sooner or later, someone would push them far enough to use it. And when that happened, the entire galaxy would learn what it meant when humanity decided the old rules no longer applied. The Kolthari-Sidrani war had been dragging on for 8 months, and the galaxy had largely stopped paying attention. It was just another conflict, following the same patterns as dozens before it. Ships met in neutral zones, exchanged fire according to regulations, and slowly wore each other down. No one expected anything to change. That was the whole point of the Covenant. Humanity tried to stay neutral, tried to focus on building relationships with friendly species and learning how to navigate galactic politics. But neutrality only works when everyone lets you remain neutral. And the Kolthari Empire was not known for respecting the wishes of smaller species. Danny Carter was in his quarters at the council station when the message came through. The Kolthari demanded access to human-controlled shipping lanes in the outer solar system. They claimed ancient navigation rights, treaties signed before Earth even knew aliens existed. The demand was backed by legal documents, historical precedent, and an unmistakable threat. Danny brought the issue before the council, hoping for support, but the response was disappointing. Several species advised cooperation. The Kolthari were powerful, they argued, and humanity was new. It would be wiser to negotiate than to resist. Others simply stayed silent, unwilling to antagonize the Kolthari over a species they barely knew. When Danny refused the demand, citing Earth's sovereignty over its own system, the Kolthari response was swift and predictable. A battle fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system 3 days later. The EDS Valiant was the only ship in position to intercept. Captain Ryan Foster took command calmly, though everyone on board knew they were outmatched. The Valiant was humanity's newest warship, built with galactic technology and assistance from the Vryn. But it was one ship against 15 Kolthari vessels, including a massive flagship that outmassed the Valiant 5-1. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from Earth's orbital command center, his hands gripping the edge of his console. The Valiant's crew were good people, trained and ready, but this wasn't a fair fight. He opened a secure channel to the ship. "Ryan, you have authorization to use all available weapon systems." "All of them." There was a pause, then Ryan's voice came back steady and clear. "Confirmed, Admiral. All systems authorized." On the Valiant's bridge, Kate Phillips stood at her weapons station. She had been promoted to commander and given responsibility for all of the ship's armaments. That included the standard energy weapons that appeared on every registry and report, and it included the railgun that officially didn't exist. Warlord Kresh, commander of the Kolthari fleet, sent a final message. His translator made his words sharp and dismissive. "Human vessel, you are alone and outmatched. Stand aside or be destroyed. The Covenant allows us to enforce our legitimate claims." Ryan looked at Kate, then at his crew. They were scared, but they trusted him. "Send a response. Tell them Earth doesn't recognize their claims and we will defend our territory." The Kolthari opened fire first. 15 ships launched brilliant blue plasma bolts that streaked across the black space between the fleets. The Valiant's shields flared as the energy splashed against them, systems straining to dissipate the heat and radiation. Alarms sounded across the bridge as the shield strength dropped from the initial barrage. Kate returned fire with the Valiant's energy weapons. Twin plasma cannons sent their own bolts toward the nearest Kolthari cruiser. The shots were carefully calculated to stay within Covenant power limits, just like the regulations required. They hit the Kolthari shields and dissipated harmlessly, exactly as galactic warfare doctrine predicted. The battle played out like every other battle the galaxy had seen for thousands of years. Ships maneuvered for optimal firing angles, shields absorbed and reflected energy, and slowly, incrementally, both sides took damage. The Valiant was good, her crew skilled, but mathematics didn't lie. Against 15 ships, they would lose. Ryan watched his shield levels drop below 50%. "Kate, how long can we hold?" "Maybe 10 more minutes at this rate," she replied. "Then we'll have to retreat or surrender. Or we use Thunderbolt." Kate's hands moved to the secondary weapons console, the one that wasn't connected to the main tactical network. The Railgun had been installed secretly, hidden inside what looked like a standard sensor array. Amy Chen had done brilliant work, making it nearly invisible to external scans. "Targeting the flagship," Kate said quietly. Firing sequence initiated. The Railgun didn't look impressive when it fired. There was no bright flash, no dramatic energy discharge. Just a brief flicker as the magnetic coils activated and a tungsten iron projectile accelerated down the length of the rail. In 3 seconds, the projectile reached 12% of light speed. In less than a millisecond after that, it crossed the distance between the Valiant and the Kolthari flagship. The projectile hit the flagship's shields and passed through them like they weren't there. The shields were designed to stop energy, to dissipate heat, to redirect particle streams. They had no defense against a solid object moving at relativistic speeds. The projectile continued through the shield envelope and struck the flagship's hull. The kinetic energy release was instant and catastrophic. The projectile punched through the armor, through internal bulkheads, through structural supports, releasing energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon as it went. The flagship didn't explode dramatically. It simply came apart, torn into pieces by forces its designers had never considered. For a moment, the entire Kolthari fleet stopped firing. Their formation broke as ships peeled away from the expanding debris cloud that had been their flagship. Warlord Kresh was gone, vaporized in an instant. His second-in-command aboard a heavy cruiser sent an urgent message to the Valiant. "What weapon was that?" "It is not in your registry. The Covenant requires all weapons to be declared and regulated," Kate responded, her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "We employed a magnetic acceleration cannon, commonly called a railgun. It fires solid projectiles using electromagnetic force. The weapon is not covered under the Covenant of Civilized Warfare, because kinetic weapons were not included in the treaty. No regulation was violated." The silence that followed was profound. The Kolthari had no response prepared for this situation. Their entire military doctrine, refined over thousands of years, was based on energy weapons and shields designed to counter them. No one had thought to defend against something as primitive as throwing rocks really fast. The second-in-command made a quick decision. The Kolthari fleet turned and retreated, leaving the solar system at maximum speed. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a blockade had been broken with a single shot. On the Valiant's bridge, Ryan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His crew was silent, staring at their displays in shock. They had just killed hundreds, maybe thousands of Kolthari with one shot. The enemy ship's crew had no chance to evacuate, no time to surrender. It was efficient, brutal, and completely outside the bounds of how wars were supposed to be fought. Kate's hands were shaking slightly as she secured the railgun systems. "Sir, we just changed everything," Ryan nodded slowly. "I know, Jake, did you catch all of that?" On Earth, Admiral Morrison replied immediately. "We caught it. Stand by, Ryan. Things are about to get very complicated." Danny Carter was dragged from his sleep by an emergency alert. The council was convening an unprecedented midnight session. By the time he reached the chamber, it was already in chaos. News of the Valiant's engagement had spread through the galactic communication networks in minutes. Every species that had access to long-range sensors had watched the Kolthari flagship disintegrate. Ambassador Zekthar found Danny in the crowd. The Vrin's 4 eyes all focused on him with an intensity that was almost frightening. "What have you done?" "We defended our territory," Danny said firmly. "The Kolthari threatened us with military force. We responded. With a weapon that should not exist," Zekthar said quietly. "Do you understand what you have unleashed? For 10,000 years we have had peace because warfare was predictable. Energy weapons against energy shields. Rules that everyone followed. You have just reminded the galaxy that other ways exist. Ways that you all forgot about, Danny pointed out. We didn't invent kinetic weapons, Ambassador. Every species in this chamber knows the physics. You just decided they were too primitive to bother with. Because they were unnecessary, Zekthar replied. Why use a hammer when a scalpel works better? But now you have shown that the hammer still works, and it works very well indeed. The emergency council session lasted for hours. The Kolthari delegation demanded sanctions, reparations, and the immediate destruction of all human kinetic weapons. Other species called for an emergency amendment to the Covenant to ban such weapons retroactively. But Danny stood his ground, supported by a few voices that grew louder as the session continued. The Sidrani counselor, whose species was still at war with the Kolthari, made a point that changed the tone of the debate. The Covenant of Civilized Warfare does not mention kinetic weapons. It regulates energy weapons, antimatter devices, and nuclear weapons. But it says nothing about magnetic acceleration. The humans have violated no treaty they agreed to. If anything, the Kolthari violated the Covenant by threatening a newly contacted species with military force. The emergency council session stretched into its third day, and still no consensus had been reached. Danny Carter was exhausted, surviving on stimulants and stubborn determination. The chamber that had once seemed so impressive now felt like a prison, filled with angry voices and accusations flying in a dozen different languages. The Kolthari delegation was the loudest, demanding justice for their fallen warriors. Their representative, a scarred veteran named Gresh, spoke with barely contained fury. His translator struggled to capture the rage in his words. The humans must be punished. They used a weapon of barbarism, a weapon that gives no chance for honorable surrender. Our warriors died without warning, without the chance to retreat under the Covenant's protection. This is not civilized warfare. This is butchery. Other species echoed similar concerns. The Tarathi, known for their strict adherence to tradition, called humanity's actions a violation of the spirit of the Covenant, even if not the letter. The Nexian collective worried about what would happen if other species started developing kinetic weapons. The careful balance of galactic power could collapse overnight. But there were also voices of support, or at least understanding. The Sidrani counselor, whose crystalline shell pulsed with inner light, pointed out facts that made the Kolthari uncomfortable. Let us be clear about what happened. The Kolthari Empire, engaged in a war with my people, decided to divert military resources to threaten a species that had been part of the galactic community for less than a year. They demanded concessions based on ancient treaties that Earth never signed. When humanity refused, the Kolthari sent a battle fleet to enforce their will. Under the Covenant, such actions against a non-combatant species are questionable at best. Gresh slammed his hand on his platform. We acted within our rights. Ancient navigation laws predate any human claims. Ancient laws written by species that are now dust, the Sidrani shot back. You cannot claim rights over a system based on treaties signed before its inhabitants even knew you existed. The humans defended their home. That is their right. Covenant or no covenant. Danny listened to the arguments flow back and forth, but he knew the real issue wasn't about rights or treaties. It was about fear. For thousands of years, the galaxy had operated on a specific set of assumptions. Warfare was predictable, limited, and survivable. Losing a war meant territory and resources changed hands, but civilizations endured. The system worked because everyone played by the same rules. Humanity had just broken those rules, and the galaxy was terrified about what that meant. On the fourth day, Danny requested permission to address the full council. He stood at the human platform looking out at hundreds of alien faces and chose his words carefully. Honorable counselors, I understand your concerns. Humanity is new to this community, and we have much to learn from civilizations far older and wiser than ours. But I must ask you to consider something important. When the Vryn made first contact with Earth, Ambassador Zekthar gave us your laws, your treaties, and your assumptions about how things should work. We were told that kinetic weapons were primitive, obsolete, and useless. We accepted this because we trusted the wisdom of species with thousands of years of experience. He paused, letting his words sink in. But when the Kolthari threatened us, we looked at the situation with fresh eyes. We studied the technical data you provided about shields and defenses, and we realized that your shields were designed to stop energy weapons because that's all anyone uses. No one had bothered to defend against kinetic weapons because everyone agreed they were outdated. That is precisely the problem, a Tarathi counselor interrupted. You exploited a gap in our defenses that exists only because we trusted each other to follow civilized norms. No, Danny said firmly. We exploited a gap that exists because you stopped innovating. You created a system that worked for you, the established powers, and then you stopped questioning it. The Covenant is supposed to limit destruction and prevent unnecessary death, but it's also used to keep young species like mine at a permanent disadvantage. You fight wars of attrition because you can afford to. We can't. Ambassador Zekthar spoke for the first time in days. The Vrin's voice was sad, almost disappointed. Daniel Carter, do you understand what you are advocating for? The long peace has kept this galaxy from tearing itself apart. Yes, wars still happen, but they are limited. Civilizations survive. If kinetic weapons become common, if species start building weapons designed to overwhelm defenses instantly, we return to an age of total war. Planets can be cracked. Billions can die in moments. Is that what you want? Danny met the ambassador's multiple eyes. What I want is for humanity to survive. You're asking us to fight by rules designed by species who have thousands of ships, vast resources, and the luxury of time. We have none of that. If we follow your covenant exactly as written, we'll always be at the mercy of older, stronger species. We'll be second-class citizens in a galaxy that claims to value all civilized life equally. So you would rather see the galaxy burn? Kresh demanded. I would rather see the galaxy adapt, Danny replied. You all act like kinetic weapons are some kind of forbidden knowledge, but they're not. The physics is basic. Any species with magnetic acceleration can build a railgun. The only reason you don't have them is because you decided long ago they weren't needed. But that was your choice, not a law of nature. A small counselor from a species Danny didn't recognize spoke up. Her voice was high and musical. The human makes a point we are uncomfortable admitting. We have become complacent. Our warfare is ritualized, predictable, and yes, designed to favor those with more ships and more resources. Perhaps we needed someone new to show us that our assumptions could be challenged. That is dangerous thinking, the Torathi counselor warned. If we begin questioning the Covenant, if we allow each species to develop whatever weapons they wish, chaos will follow. The debate continued for hours more, but Danny could feel the momentum shifting. The galaxy was beginning to accept that they couldn't simply ban kinetic weapons. The knowledge was out. Within days of the Valiant's engagement, 3 other species had announced their own railgun development programs. The Sidrani, still at war with the Koltari, were particularly enthusiastic about weapons that could penetrate Koltari shields. On the 5th day, the Council finally voted on a resolution. It was not what the Koltari wanted, but it was also not a complete victory for humanity. The Council acknowledged that kinetic weapons were not prohibited under the current Covenant. However, they also declared that the Covenant needed to be updated to address this new reality. A committee would be formed to draft the Kinetic Accords, a new treaty that would regulate solid projectile weapons the same way energy weapons were regulated. Power limits, engagement protocols, and monitoring requirements would be extended to cover kinetic systems. Every species would have 6 months to declare their kinetic weapon capabilities and comply with the new regulations. Danny accepted the resolution, though it meant humanity would have to reveal the full extent of Project Thunderbolt. But he also negotiated a crucial concession. In exchange for agreeing to the Kinetic Accords, Earth would receive technical assistance in developing defensive systems capable of stopping kinetic weapons. The Vrin Collective, with their advanced gravitational manipulation technology, agreed to share shield designs that could deflect solid matter. When the session finally ended, Zekthar approached Danny one last time. The ambassador looked older somehow, wearier. You have changed the galaxy, Daniel Carter. I hope you are proud of what comes next. I'm not proud, Danny admitted. I'm scared. But I'm also hopeful. Your long peace was built on stagnation, Ambassador. Maybe what comes next will be better, or maybe it will be worse. But at least it will be honest. Back on Earth, Admiral Lisa Hayes read Danny's report with mixed feelings. The Kinetic Accords would force humanity to share their railgun technology, but they would also gain access to defenses that could counter it. The playing field was being leveled, but in a way that made everyone more dangerous. Engineer Amy Chen was already working with Vrin technicians, learning how to integrate gravitational deflector shields with human ship designs. The math was complex, the engineering challenging, but it was possible. Within a year, Earth ships would have defenses against both energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. Captain Ryan Foster oversaw the refit of the Valiant. watching as the new shield systems were installed alongside the now famous Railgun. The ship was becoming a symbol of the new era, armed with both old and new, protected by shields that no other species had needed until humanity arrived. Kate Phillips, promoted again for her role in the battle, stood with Ryan on the observation deck as the work continued. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked. Ryan considered the question carefully. "I think we did the only thing we could. The galaxy wanted us to play by their rules, rules that would have kept us weak and vulnerable. We showed them that there are other ways to think about warfare, about defense, about power. What they do with that knowledge is up to them. And if it leads to more destruction, then at least we'll face it as equals, not as newcomers who were told to sit down and follow orders." He turned to her with a slight smile. "Besides, we're not the ones who—" 3 months after the Council's decision to create the Kinetic Accords, Ambassador Zekthar requested a private meeting with Admiral Lisa Hayes. The request came through official channels, carefully worded and formally polite, but Lisa could read between the lines. This wasn't just diplomatic courtesy. The Vryn wanted to talk, really talk, away from the eyes and ears of the galactic community. They met aboard the EDS Valiant, now famous throughout the galaxy as the ship that changed everything. The vessel had been refitted with the new gravitational deflector shields, making it one of the most advanced warships in known space. It carried both energy weapons and the railgun that had destroyed a Kolthari flagship, protected by defenses that could stop both types of attack. The Valiant was a physical representation of the new era, a bridge between the old galaxy and whatever was coming next. Zekthar arrived alone, without the usual diplomatic entourage. The Vryn looked around the ship with all 4 eyes, taking in the human design aesthetic, the cramped corridors, the practical rather than beautiful architecture. When the ambassador spoke, the translator's tone was more personal than Lisa had ever heard before. "I wanted to see this ship for myself," Zekthar said, "the ship that ended the long peace." Lisa guided the ambassador to the observation deck, where they could see Earth turning slowly below them. "We didn't end peace, Ambassador. We just changed the rules of warfare. Rules that kept the galaxy stable for 10,000 years, Zekthar replied. But there was no anger in the words, just a deep sadness. "I am old, Admiral Hayes. Older than you can probably imagine. I have seen the rise and fall of civilizations, watched species learn to master the stars, and witnessed the terrible wars that nearly destroyed us all. Do you know why the Covenant of Civilized Warfare was created?" Lisa shook her head, and Zekthar continued. "Before the Covenant, wars were fought without restraint. Species developed weapons of unimaginable power, each trying to gain an advantage over their enemies. Entire planets were sterilized. Billions died in single battles. The galaxy was on the verge of destroying itself through sheer technological progress." The ambassador's eyes all focused on Lisa. "So the oldest civilizations, the ones that survived, made an agreement. We would limit warfare. We would use weapons that were powerful enough to decide conflicts, but controlled enough to prevent total annihilation. Energy weapons became the standard because we could regulate them, shield against them, and ensure that battles were decided by skill and resources, rather than who could build the biggest bomb." "It worked, Admiral. For 10,000 years it worked." Lisa listened carefully, understanding the weight of what Zekthar was saying. "But it also created a system where the old and powerful stayed in control, where young species like mine had to accept whatever terms you offered." "Yes," Zekthar admitted. "The long peace was also the long stalemate. We achieved stability at the cost of progress. We forgot that there were other ways to think about warfare, because we were comfortable with the way things were. And then you arrived with your primitive kinetic weapons and your human stubbornness, and reminded us that the rules we made were just that, rules, not laws of nature. Are you angry with us?" Zekthar made a sound that the translator interpreted as a sigh. "I was at first. Furious, actually. But now I'm not sure what I feel. Perhaps your arrival was necessary. Perhaps the galaxy needed to be shaken from its complacency. But I am also afraid, Admiral. Afraid of what comes next." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Earth below. Finally, Lisa spoke. "The kinetic accords will help. By regulating kinetic weapons the same way you regulate energy weapons, we can prevent the kind of escalation you're worried about." "Will we?" Zekthar asked. "Once you open the door to questioning the old ways, where does it stop? Other species are already asking why we limit energy weapons to specific power outputs. Why do we have engagement protocols that favor larger fleets? Why do we follow any of the old rules at all? Because the alternative is chaos, Lisa said. I understand that, Ambassador. Humanity doesn't want to destroy the system you built. We just want to be part of it as equals, not as junior members who have to accept whatever terms the old civilizations decide. Zekthar turned all four eyes to her. Then help me build something better. The kinetic accords are just the beginning. We need to rethink the entire framework of galactic warfare. Make it fair for young and old species alike, but also maintain the safeguards that prevent total destruction. You have shown us that change is possible. Now show us that change can be wise as well as bold. Over the next 6 months, Lisa and Zekthar worked together on what became known as the New Covenant. It was a massive undertaking, requiring input from hundreds of species, thousands of military experts, and decades of accumulated wisdom. But at its core was a simple principle. Warfare should be regulated not to favor the powerful but to protect everyone. The New Covenant kept many elements of the old system. Energy weapons remained regulated, with power limits designed to prevent planetary destruction. But those limits were now based on actual destructive potential, not on preserving the advantage of species with larger fleets. Kinetic weapons were given similar regulations, with velocity and mass restrictions that prevented relativistic planet killers while still allowing effective ship-to-ship weapons. More importantly, the New Covenant required that defensive technology be shared. The Vryn's gravitational shields, once a closely guarded secret, would be made available to all species. Other civilizations contributed their own innovations. The goal was to ensure that no species could gain an insurmountable advantage through technology hoarding. Commander Ben Rodriguez led the human team working with alien engineers from a dozen species. What emerged was a new generation of ships that were more capable, more survivable, and more standardized than ever before. A small species could now build a warship that could stand against the fleet of an ancient empire, at least for long enough to make aggression costly. Captain Ryan Foster watched the Valiant undergo its final refit under the New Covenant specifications. The ship now carried 3 types of weapon systems: traditional energy weapons, the famous Railgun, and a new hybrid system that combined the best of both approaches. Its shields could deflect both energy and matter, and its sensors could detect threats that would have been invisible just a year ago. Kate Phillips, now executive officer of the Valiant, ran combat simulations with crews from other species. She worked alongside Sidrani tactical officers, Tarathi engineers, and even a young Kolthari weapons specialist named Vresh, nephew of the warlord who had died when the Valiant fired its first shot. "Your weapon killed my uncle," Vresh said during a break-in training. His translator carried no accusation, just a statement of fact. Kate met his eyes. "I know, I fired the shot. I've thought about it every day since. Do you regret it?" Kate considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret defending my people. Your uncle came to Earth with a fleet to threaten us. We responded the only way we could." Bresh nodded slowly. "In the old days, this conversation would end in a duel. But these are not the old days, are they? My people have studied your railgun technology. We have built our own versions, and we have learned that the Kolthari Empire was not as invincible as we believed. Perhaps that is not a bad lesson." Danny Carter returned to Earth for the first time in almost a year. He had been living at the Council Station, working on the diplomatic aspects of the New Covenant. When he finally stepped off the shuttle and felt Earth's gravity, he almost cried. Ambassador Zekthar had come with him, making the Vryn's first official visit to humanity's homeworld. They stood together at the Kennedy Space Center, watching ships come and go, and Zekthar asked a question that had been bothering the ambassador for months. "Why did you do it, Daniel? Why risk everything by using a weapon you knew would cause such upheaval?" Danny looked up at the sky, at the stars that humanity had dreamed of reaching for so long. "Because we had to prove we belonged here, not as your students or your junior partners, but as equals. The galaxy was asking us to fight with one hand tied behind our backs, and we knew that if we accepted that, we'd never be seen as anything more than newcomers who needed protection. We took a risk, and yes, it caused problems. But it also showed that we could think for ourselves, that we could find solutions you hadn't considered. And was it worth it? Ask me in 100 years, Danny said with a smile. Right now, I'm just grateful we survived long enough to have this conversation." The signing of the New Covenant took place 1 year after the Valiant fired its railgun. The ceremony was held on a neutral station, with representatives from every major species in attendance. The document was massive, covering everything from weapon specifications to engagement protocols to mutual defense agreements. But it also included something the Old Covenant never had, a clause requiring regular review and revision. The galaxy was no longer pretending it had found the perfect system. Instead, it was acknowledging that rules needed to evolve, that what worked for one era might not work for another, and that newcomers might have insights that ancient civilizations had overlooked. Admiral Lisa Hayes signed for humanity, her hand steady as she added Earth's agreement to the